phone rang in the middle of the night, and Marcus knew before he answered that something was wrong. His apartment was silent except for the steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faint tapping of tree branches against the window. When he looked at the glowing screen, the number was blocked. He considered letting it go to voicemail, but something compelled him to swipe and lift it to his ear. A child's voice whispered on the other end. It was fragile and quiet, like the last bit of air escaping from a punctured balloon. Marcus felt the hairs on his arms rise. The voice said his name. Not Mr. Hart, not Marcus Hart, just Marcus, as though the child knew him. The voice asked if he could come outside because it was so dark out there. Marcus's mouth went dry. He asked who it was, but the line went dead. He sat in his bed, phone still in hand, staring at the dark screen. His heart beat so loudly he could hear the blood rushing in his ears. He told himself it was a prank, maybe some kids messing around with a random number. Yet he felt a strange pressure in his chest, an unshakable weight, as though the call had pulled something into the room with him. Marcus could not sleep again. Every creak of the old building sounded magnified. At 3:47 in the morning, he heard a sound outside his door, soft scraping against the hallway floor. He pressed his ear against the wooden door and held his breath. The scraping stopped. He told himself he imagined it, forced himself back to bed, and pulled the blanket over his head. The next morning he tried to brush it off. He lived alone, worked long hours at the insurance office, and often felt the dull ache of loneliness. Maybe his mind was making something out of nothing. He went about his day, but the moment he returned to his apartment, he felt it again. A presence. The quiet did not feel empty anymore, it felt watchful. That night the phone rang again. Same blocked number. This time Marcus almost threw the phone across the room. He answered with shaking hands. The same small voice asked why he did not come outside. It said it had been waiting. Marcus demanded to know where the child was, what kind of joke this was, who put him up to it. The voice did not respond to the questions. It only said it was hungry. Marcus stayed awake until dawn with every light on. He paced the apartment, checked the locks again and again, and finally left for work looking like he had aged a decade overnight. His co-workers noticed, but he brushed them off with a weak laugh. He could not tell them what was happening. He knew how it would sound. On the third night, the phone rang at exactly 2:14 in the morning. Marcus answered because he could not stop himself. The child asked him to come outside and said it was standing by the streetlight near the corner. Against every ounce of logic, Marcus moved to the window. He peered through the blinds at the street below. At first he saw nothing. Then he saw movement. Something small, the height of a child, standing beneath the orange glow of the street lamp. Its face was turned up toward his window, though the details were lost in shadow. Marcus dropped the blinds and staggered backward, his chest heaving. The phone slipped from his hand, but the call did not disconnect. The voice whispered now from the floor where the phone lay. It asked why he was hiding. It told him it could see him anyway. For the next week, Marcus lived in a state of raw terror. The calls came every night, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. Each time the voice grew less like a child and more like something trying to remember how a child should sound. Words came out broken, stretched in strange ways, syllables bent at wrong angles. He stopped answering, but the voicemails piled up. Each message began with his name. Sometimes it was nothing but breathing. Sometimes it asked him to let it in. He stopped going to work. He barely ate. He kept all the blinds shut and taped black trash bags over the windows. He unplugged his television, his computer, and his landline. He left the cell phone in the freezer, muffled by frozen food, but even then he swore he could hear it vibrating deep in the night. He began to smell something, faint at first but growing stronger each day. Damp soil, rot, and the copper tang of blood. It clung to his sheets, to his clothes, to the air itself. He could not locate the source. On the 8th night, he awoke to the sound of his door handle turning. Slow, deliberate clicks as though someone was testing the lock. He held his breath under the blanket and prayed it would stop. After several minutes of silence, he thought it was over. Then his phone lit up on the nightstand, though it was still buried in the freezer. He stared in disbelief at the glowing screen, at the blocked number calling again. The ringtone was muffled, distorted, echoing as though coming from a long tunnel. He did not touch it. He could not move. The next morning he decided to leave. He shoved clothes into a bag and fled the apartment, leaving the phone behind. He drove for hours until he reached his sister's house in another state. For the first time in days he felt safe. He told her only that he had been stressed and needed a break. She welcomed him, gave him a room, and made him eat a real meal. He slept heavily, dreamlessly, like a man starved of rest. At dawn, the sound woke him. A phone ringing on the nightstand. His sister had left an old cordless house phone there for convenience. He stared at it, dread turning his stomach to ice. The small green screen displayed a blocked number. He picked it up with trembling hands, unable to stop himself. The child's voice whispered his name. Then it said it was already inside. One night in late October, Mark noticed the cracks on his bedroom ceiling had changed. He had lived in that house for 3 years and knew every stain, every mark, every imperfection. Yet that night when he lay down and stared upward, the cracks did not form the same crooked lines he was used to. They bent in new directions, branching like veins, spreading in patterns he could swear were not there the day before. He told himself he was tired. He had worked late, and his eyes must have been playing tricks on him. Still, as the hours crawled by and silence thickened, the cracks seemed to darken. They were no longer pale lines, but thin shadows, stretching wider, sharper, almost like scratches. He turned onto his side to avoid looking at them, but something about the ceiling drew him back again and again, like a magnet tugging at his vision. By 2 in the morning, he was sitting upright in bed, staring at them. The lines had grown deeper, curling toward one another until they resembled an outline. Not random anymore, a shape. It looked like a face pressed from the other side of the ceiling, straining to break through. He laughed, but the sound was hollow. He grabbed his phone to take a picture, certain that the flash would reveal nothing but plaster and paint. Yet when the photo appeared, his chest tightened. The cracks were darker in the picture, so dark they almost looked wet, and the face was more defined. Hollow eyes, a mouth opened too wide. Mark did not sleep that night. He turned on every light in the room, but the cracks did not fade. He sat at his desk until sunrise, drinking coffee, pretending to work, but his eyes kept flicking back to the ceiling. The next night, the cracks had spread, not just in his bedroom, but down the hallway. Thin black lines running along the edges of the ceiling, stretching toward the living room. He pressed his fingers against one and felt nothing unusual. Smooth plaster, no indent, no moisture. But when he pulled his hand back, faint gray dust clung to his fingertips, the kind that smelled faintly of stone. He vacuumed, painted over the cracks, even pushed his bed to the other side of the room. But by the following evening, the lines had returned, sharper than before. And that night, just as he was drifting into uneasy sleep, he heard the first sound. It was faint but unmistakable, a whisper muffled, like someone pressing their lips to the wall and speaking through the plaster. He froze in bed, holding his breath. The sound went on for a full minute, words he could not understand, distorted by layers of wood and stone, before it faded into silence. He did not sleep again. By the end of the week, the whispers had grown bolder. They came at different hours, sometimes late at night, sometimes while he was making breakfast. Always from the ceiling, always too faint to make out, but they grew longer. Sentences, pleading tones. Once, he thought he heard his own name. Mark considered leaving, but the lease tied him there for 6 more months, and he told himself it was just stress. Maybe mold behind the walls, maybe the pipes. He convinced himself of everything except what he truly felt, that someone or something was pressing against the skin of his house, waiting to be let in. On the 10th night, the scratching began. It started with a single scrape above his bed, like nails dragging slowly across wood. He sat up so fast his neck cracked. The sound stopped. He waited in silence, hands clenched in the sheets, every muscle rigid. Then came another scrape, longer this time, traveling across the ceiling from one corner to the other. He leapt out of bed, turned on the light, and stared. The cracks were wider now, jagged black wounds tearing across the plaster. He grabbed a chair, climbed onto it, and pressed his ear against the ceiling. For a long moment, there was nothing but the faint hum of the house. Then, in a burst so sudden it made him flinch, something knocked back. 3 sharp knocks, directly where his ear pressed. Mark nearly fell off the chair. He stumbled back, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the ceiling as if expecting it to collapse. He did not sleep that night or the night after. He sat in the living room with every light on, gripping a baseball bat he had dug from the closet. By the 3rd night of no sleep, exhaustion twisted everything. Shadows seemed to breathe. The whispers became clearer. He heard sentences now, a woman's voice repeating, over and over, "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." He stuffed cotton in his ears. He turned on music. He slammed doors. Nothing stopped it, and every time he dared look up, the cracks were spreading further, branching down the walls like roots. On the 14th night, something new happened. Mark woke to silence. No whispers, no scratching, just silence so heavy it pressed against him. He sat up slowly, daring to hope that whatever it was had passed. Then he noticed the ceiling above his bed. The cracks had converged into a single, gaping line. A seam, running straight down the middle, as if the ceiling were nothing more than a lid about to open. Mark grabbed his phone, snapped another picture, and stared in horror. In the photo, the seam was not just a line. It was open, a shadowed gap, and inside, two pale hands were pressing against the edges, clawing for space. He dropped the phone and backed into the corner of the room, unable to look away. The plaster bulged downward as if something heavy pressed against it from the other side. His lamp flickered, then went out. The house plunged into darkness. From above, a voice whispered his name. Clear now. Sharp. Mark. 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 He bolted from the room, slammed the door, and ran outside into the cold night. He stood barefoot in the driveway, shivering, staring up at the dark windows of his bedroom. Nothing moved. Nothing followed. He spent the night in his car. By morning, he convinced himself it was a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. He had to believe that, otherwise he would lose his mind. But when he returned to the house, he found his bedroom door ajar. He knew he had slammed it shut. The ceiling above the bed was smooth, unbroken. No cracks, no seams. The silence felt worse than the noise. That night, he tried again to sleep in the living room. He placed the baseball bat by his side and left the lights on. He was drifting into a shallow, uneasy dream when something brushed his ankle. He sat up, gasping. Nothing was there. Then it happened again. Fingers, cold, curling around his leg. He scrambled to his feet and backed into the kitchen, chest heaving. And that was when he saw it. The cracks were not on the ceiling anymore. They were on the floor. Black lines spreading across the carpet, curling around the furniture, inching toward him like veins searching for blood. Mark ran, out the front door, down the street, barefoot again, heart hammering, until he reached the gas station 2 blocks away. He stayed there all night, drinking coffee, eyes locked on the glass door, waiting for something to follow. Nothing did. The next morning, he called his landlord and begged to break the lease. The landlord laughed, told him there was nothing wrong with the house, said he had painted and repaired it just 2 months ago. Mark hung up without another word. He checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town. The relief was immediate. The silence felt normal again. No cracks, no whispers. He showered, collapsed on the bed, and slept for 12 straight hours. When he woke, it was late evening. The motel room was dark, the only light a dim glow from the street lamp outside. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and froze. On the ceiling above him, faint and branching, were cracks. He grabbed his bag, stumbled into the parking lot, and looked around in panic. Every building he could see, every single one, had cracks spreading across the walls, the windows, the sidewalks. Thin black lines, reaching out like fingers, following him. He drove until dawn, as far as his car would take him. But when he checked into another motel, the same thing happened. Cracks in the ceiling, whispers at night, scratching, always closer, always louder. Mark realized the truth too late. He had not left the house behind. It had left with him. Whatever was in the walls, whatever pressed against the ceiling, whatever whispered through the plaster, it was inside him now, following him wherever he went. On his final night, he set his phone to record and placed it on the nightstand. He wanted proof, evidence of what was happening. When he woke in the morning, the phone was gone. In its place, carved into the wood of the nightstand, were 3 words. "Let me in." A faint scratching sound woke Daniel long before the alarm did, and he knew instantly that something was wrong. The noise was coming from the far end of the hallway, steady and rhythmic, like nails dragging across wood. At first he thought it was a branch scraping against the side of the house, but the pattern was too precise. It came in bursts of 3, then silence, then 3 again, like someone was deliberately signaling. He lay frozen in bed, staring at the dark outline of his doorway, listening to the house breathe around him. The neighborhood was quiet. He had chosen this house because it stood alone at the edge of the forest, far from neighbors and noise, the kind of place where solitude wrapped itself around you like a blanket. That night, the blanket felt heavy and suffocating. He reached for his phone on the nightstand. No messages, no missed calls. 3:14 a.m. He forced himself to breathe evenly, straining to hear beyond the silence that followed the scratching. Then the sound came again, louder, as if it had moved closer. He sat up in bed, skin prickling. The hallway light switch was by the door, but to reach it he would have to step into the dark. He told himself it was nothing, maybe a mouse or a raccoon trapped somewhere, but the logic barely touched the fear crawling in his gut. He remembered stories he had read online, threads about people hearing knocking or scratching in empty houses. Most had explanations. Some didn't. The sound stopped. He stood barefoot on the wooden floorboards, each step creaking, and opened the bedroom door. The hallway stretched in front of him, narrow and pale in the dim glow of moonlight slipping through a small window at the far end. Nothing moved. He flipped the switch, and the bulb flickered to life, casting shadows that stretched like claws across the walls. The scratching started again, this time directly below him. He froze, realizing it wasn't the hallway after all. It was coming from beneath the floor. The house had a basement, unfinished and damp, a place he rarely entered. His chest tightened as he walked slowly toward the door that led downstairs. The air grew colder near it, heavy with the smell of earth and mold. He wrapped his hand around the brass knob, hesitating as another series of scratches rose up through the wood, sharper now, more desperate. Something was down there. He turned the knob, and the door groaned open. Darkness spilled up the staircase like water flooding a room. He flicked the switch on the wall, but the bulb below only glowed weakly before dying with a pop. The basement remained black. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, and grabbed a flashlight from the closet nearby. The beam cut through the dark as he descended one careful step at a time. The basement smelled stronger the deeper he went. Dirt, mildew, something metallic lingering in the air. The scratching had stopped again. At the bottom of the stairs, the beam swept across cement walls and stacks of old boxes. Dust drifted through the light, and pipes clung to the ceiling like skeletal veins. He moved the flashlight slowly, scanning every shadow. Nothing. No animals. No sign of movement. Just silence pressing in from every side. He nearly laughed with relief, feeling foolish for his fear. But as he turned to go back upstairs, the light caught something unusual along the far wall. At first it looked like a patch of darker cement. When he stepped closer, he saw that it was wood, not stone at all. A section of the wall that had been covered in old boards, nailed crudely into place. They were stained with something dark, something that had seeped down and dried years ago. The scratches had left faint white marks across the surface, fresh marks, as if fingernails had raked it from the other side. His stomach twisted. He raised his hand and pressed his palm flat against the wood. Cold. Too cold, as though the air behind it was deeper than the basement itself. He knocked once softly. The hollow sound echoed back. Then something knocked in return. He staggered backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. His heart slammed against his ribs, and a buzzing filled his ears. He pointed the light at the boards again. Nothing moved, but the air seemed to vibrate with the memory of that sound. A slow, deliberate knock answering his own. He ran back up the stairs and slammed the door shut, locking it with shaking hands. The scratching did not return. The rest of the night he sat in his bedroom chair, flashlight clutched tight, staring at the hallway door as if it might burst open at any moment. Dawn finally came, pale and indifferent, and with it came a false sense of safety. The day passed in a blur. He tried to distract himself with work, with chores, but the thought of the boarded wall never left him. Why had someone sealed it up? Why were there scratches on the inside? He told himself he would call someone, maybe a contractor, maybe the police. But he didn't. Some part of him didn't want anyone else to know. That night he dreamed. In the dream he was in the basement again, standing before the boards, listening to a faint whisper threading through the wood. He couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm of them, soft and coaxing, like a lullaby sung through gritted teeth. The boards began to bend inward, bulging as if something pressed against them, trying to crawl through. He woke drenched in sweat, mouth dry, and for a moment he swore he could still hear the whisper. He promised himself he would not go back down there. He kept the basement door locked and left every light in the house on. For 3 nights nothing happened. Then the scratching returned, louder than before, rising up from the floor with frantic insistence. He pressed his hands against his ears, but the sound vibrated through the wood, through the walls, through his bones. On the 4th night, he heard a voice. It began as a faint hum, barely audible under the scratching, then formed into words. Daniel. The sound was muffled but unmistakable. Someone down there was calling his name. He couldn't breathe. His hands shook so badly, he almost dropped his phone while trying to dial the police. But what would he say? That there was someone scratching at his basement wall? That he had heard his own name whispered by a voice that could not exist? He ended the call before pressing send. Instead, he sat in the kitchen with the flashlight and a knife, staring at the locked door. Hours passed, the voice calling occasionally, patient and deliberate, Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it laughed. Always it said his name. By dawn the voice stopped. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He looked into the mirror above the sink and barely recognized the man staring back at him. Hollow eyes, pale skin, cracked lips. That day he researched the house, digging through old town records and newspapers. The property had belonged to the same family for decades before being abandoned. There were vague mentions of a daughter who went missing, a girl who was never found. Rumors of strange noises in the woods. Nothing concrete, nothing that explained the boards. When night fell again, Daniel knew he would not survive another round of scratching and whispers. He needed answers. He needed to know. He gathered tools, a hammer, a crowbar, and the flashlight. His hands trembled as he unlocked the basement door. The air was colder this time, as if the darkness had been waiting for him. He forced himself down the stairs, each creak of the steps echoing like a warning. The boards waited for him at the far wall. The stains looked darker than before, wet almost. He pressed the crowbar into the first gap and pried hard. Nails screeched as the wood snapped free. The whisper grew clearer. Daniel, closer now, almost at his ear. He yanked another board loose, then another, adrenaline surging through him. The air seeping out of the cracks was freezing, laced with the stink of rot. His flashlight beam trembled as he pulled the last board free and revealed the space beyond. It wasn't a room. It was a tunnel, narrow and descending into the earth. The dirt walls were packed tight, claw marks etched deep into them. The smell was overwhelming. Something moved inside the tunnel. At first it looked like shadows shifting, but then pale fingers curled around the edge of the opening. Too many fingers, jointed wrong, bending in directions they shouldn't. A hand emerged, followed by another, both gripping the edges of the tunnel as if something was dragging itself up from the depths. Daniel stumbled back, choking on fear, but the whisper rose into a rasping laugh. A face appeared, pale and stretched thin, eyes black and glistening, mouth too wide, lips cracked into a smile that revealed rows of teeth. It spoke again. Daniel, thank you. He dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, catching glimpses of the thing as it pulled itself free. Limbs too long, skin hanging in tatters, hair matted with dirt. Its body seemed to shiver as if it was not used to air, not used to space. It crawled forward, scraping across the cement with claws that had worn themselves bloody. Daniel ran. He sprinted up the stairs, slammed the door, locked it, and shoved a chair beneath the knob. He heard it moving below, scraping and dragging, testing the steps. The sound was wrong, too fast, too erratic. Hours passed. He sat trembling in the corner of his bedroom, knife in hand, listening as the sounds shifted from below to above, scratching at the ceiling, scraping at the walls. It knew where he was. When dawn came, the noises stopped. He opened the door cautiously. The basement was silent, but the boards lay scattered across the floor. The tunnel gaped wide, waiting. He tried to leave the house, but the woods outside seemed different, darker, the trees pressing close together, blocking the path to the road. No birds sang. No wind stirred. The world felt smaller, as if the house and the forest were swallowing everything else. At night the scratching returned. Louder, closer, sometimes at the walls, sometimes at the windows, sometimes at the bedroom door. He hasn't slept in days. His phone no longer works. The clocks have stopped at 3:14 a.m. He writes these words because he knows he won't last much longer. Something is inside the house now. It calls his name not from the basement, not from the tunnel, but from just beyond the bedroom door. And it is patient, and it is waiting.